Well, hi everybody. My name's Charlie Beale. I'm the vice president of the board of GALA Choruses, and I used to be the artistic director of New York City Gay Men's Chorus for many years. And today it's my honor and privilege to be introducing this talk by Julia Balén, or Jules as we're going to call her. She's the professor of English and a founding faculty member of Chicane Studies, Freedom and Justice Studies, and Philosophy at California State University, Channel Islands. She's been involved in queer choral movement for over 30 years, 40 if you count early involvement in small communal women's singing groups, which I think we do, and has dedicated her research, her writing, her service, and all her community work to creating greater equity for everybody. Jules is coming to us from the sacred lands of Tocheño Ohlone people of the East San Francisco Bay Area. And now I'm going to hand over to her for her to begin presentation. Over to you, Jules.
Thanks so much, Charlie. And thank you all for being here. I dreamt of Minneapolis for so long. I've been waiting for this moment to share this book with the people who made the book possible. And since we can't be there, I'm just grateful for everyone who could show up tonight. And for those of you who may be watching who are not part of this movement, I just want to do a little disclaimer and say that I'm speaking mostly to GALA and sister singer and queer choral movement members tonight because in honor of festival. But if you don't understand anything, there's the chat, so you can ask questions there. I want to speak briefly about the challenge of a virtual reading. I miss your presence. Performers know what a difference it makes to have an audience, to have people there smiling back, or maybe not smiling back, but you respond to the people in the audience, and all I have is this camera. So I'm imagining you there and holding this space as if you were here with me physically, holding you in my mind's eye. So I've been a singer since I can remember, but in this movement, I participated in very informal women's gatherings. Some, with one group or another came and went over several years, especially in the late 70s, early 80s. When Desert Voices came along in Tucson, I joined early on and became a board member and eventually a board president. When I took a job in California, I was in Ventura County and there wasn't a chorus. And so I did my best to start a chorus. And for several years, we had a very small chorus. I think the most we ever had singing was 12 people, called Freedom Sings Out. And boy, did I get a chance to find out how difficult directing is, and I'm not a director. So that I learned. But we did manage to put shows on, and it was actually quite gratifying and dear. And hello to Desert Voices members out there, and hello to anybody who might have sung with us in Freedom Sings Out. When I came to the Bay Area, I've had the chance then to sing with the Lesbian Gay Chorus of San Francisco. Hello, LGCSF. You're going to see in the slides I'm going to do later a preponderance of pictures from them. Thank you so much for allowing me that. I've been a participant observer in this organization and GALA since 1996. That was my first GALA festival. And that's when I first went, wait a minute, this is much bigger than I had thought it was. That's kind of the magic of it in a way, because a lot of us come from our little local chorus, or maybe not so little local chorus, but we get this chance to come and sing with thousands of people from around the world. And that experience made me ask why. And quite honestly, I always thought it was a little queer that I was drawn to such a formal form of musicking that had religious overtones and histories and such. And I always thought I was always a little at odds with it. These questions were roiling around in me. I attended leadership conferences. I attended 2 various voices festivals. Those are the ones in Europe, in Dublin and in München. I have visited, I don't know how many choruses, I've lost track. I've gone to their practice sessions and been backstage with them. And I thank everyone who allowed me to be part of your chorus for a while. I interviewed chorus members, directors, audience members, tech people. But more than that, I listened a lot for many years. As the first person writing a book on a topic, I went looking for models, and in 1997-ish, when I started really digging in, I was surprised to find, I was expecting I would find labor movement, music in the labor movement, music in civil rights movement, and there was nothing really about that analyzed the use of music in those movements, except Karen Sanger's book, When the Spirit Says Sing. So the models I was hoping to find and the background that would help me was barely starting up. About our movement itself, there were 2 articles, Kathy Roma's Women's Choral Communities Singing for Our Lives, and Paul Antonello's Authority and Freedom Toward a Sociology of Gay Choruses, which I found very interesting because the authority thing with directors is always a thing for me. I've gotten over it. It was in a collection called Queering the Pitch. And Queering the Pitch was a radical piece of ethnomusicology at the time. So it wasn't until the 2000s and really this past decade that we started seeing more analysis of musicking practices. And when we say musicking practices, we're using Christopher Small's term that takes into account everybody's participation. So, and the places that the performances take place in, everything from space to economics to the people participating, who is and who isn't, why, et cetera. So it's a very interdisciplinary approach. And what I mostly wanted to do was to tease out and articulate what work for social justice these choruses that aspired to change the world in various ways were actually doing. What were the mechanisms? What works and what doesn't so well? What do people intend to do and how well did they do it, sort of thing. So I was really digging around for that. I do have one regret about the book, and that is that when I started it, the institutional review board that has to okay your survey process did not allow me, they required that I anonymize the interviews. And while in later years, I was allowed not to, when it came to writing the book, I had to make a choice because I had no time or money that it would take to go back and get permissions again from everybody. So I chose to anonymize everyone. And that was a hard decision. And it's one I'm sad that I had to make. And I just want to put that out there. So let's state the obvious, because when we fail to do so, we also fail to recognize the power of anything that goes without saying. Namely, that this is a largely white, largely male identified, largely middle class, and some would even say homonormative movement. That said, there is healing and social change that has happened and continues to happen within this particular piece of queer social movement. And like many movements that are from the ground up, we have always been more than that. We've always aspired to be more than that. And that aspiration gives us room to grow and learn and change. But this movement also offers us a particular window into work for social justice. And that's what I wanted to do. In the book, I compare our musicking practices to musicking practices for social justice in civil rights and labor. I also compare our social practices to queer organizing, such as gay games, the Metropolitan Community Church, the queer community centers, pride events, the things that I could sort of quantify to some degree and that had been documented more easily. And then I looked at choral musicking as a practice more generally, any choral musicking, to get at the role, the mechanisms at work in what we do. So I looked at, and hey, this is where I need to do the share screen piece. So give me a moment. I looked at so many things. Buttons. Oh, and I want to say thanks. There's many thanks to say. There's so many thanks to say, but thanks especially to Joel Davis, SFGMC, Catherine Roma, Michael Lucero, Paxahim Sagethan, and LGCSF, and Paul Cruz and GALA for access to things that I couldn't get access to for myself, given COVID. And this would be nowhere near as nice of a slideshow without it. So, but I looked at music and lyrics and flyers and news articles and, you know, programs from way back and articles of incorporation and board me. I didn't put the board notes up here. Are taking on the American Choral Directors Association, the ACDA. Our first program. I thought this was beautiful, thanks to Joel. And, you know, really looked at what kinds of songs are we singing? How are they changing over the years? What's the message? How are we presenting ourselves? And how have we affected each other in the process? And there was a lot of that. So the leadership conferences, and then I attended leadership conferences, of course, and took notes, and I took notes. And I suppose the places that I loved were the workshops at the festivals, where the informal discussions about what was going on in people's choruses and everything that was happening there. So, oh yes, and galograms, of course, the many galograms. So, and posters. So to begin, because we can't be at festival. Oh, and I have to say, it's obscene that I can't put music on this, but we can't technologically, it just doesn't work. So I'm going to begin by reading a piece that came out of Festival 2016. So put your festival hats on, and in the process, I'm going to set this to run so you get sort of some nice view while I'm reading. Views of festivals, etc. 16 women from a small town step onto the stage of one of the largest of several performing spaces at GALA's Festival 2016. Denver's Beale Theater seats almost 3,000. There are approximately 2,000 in the audience, mostly singers from the other choruses. Roughly 2/3 of those seated are men, many of whom probably chose this block of performances to see one of the movement's biggest and most highly regarded TTBB choruses, which will be singing at the end of the block. The 16 women stand in a single curved line on a stage that dwarfs them, on which every move and sound they make is obvious to everyone in the hall. They do not have the 5 rows of 25 voices each standing behind them as the front row of the men's chorus that follows them will have. Their voices, in this sense, are both individually naked and utterly dependent on each other, as each change in tempo, pitch, and timbre affects every other voice and their sound as a whole. Nearly everyone in the audience understands this feeling of vocal nakedness in their bodies. The group's first number goes well, though their voices sound thin in the Denver air. It is a thinness every singer in the audience has no doubt experienced, not enough breath flowing. Fear, the sheer terror of being exposed in front of so many people can tighten the body, the vocal cords. It's our animal cells preparing for flight, fight, or freeze. Countering fear, their daring voices tumble forward. They make it through their first song and the crowd cheers them warmly. They are a bit more confident on their second number, maybe because they know it better, maybe because they've finished their first and been cheered, maybe because this one's humorous, or maybe all three. And again, they are warmly cheered. On the next tune, 3 soloists move forward to the mics. Each takes her turn on lines followed and filled out by the chorus. Then one forgets her words. A split second of fear and shame spreads across her face, ripples through her chorus, and is felt through the hall. She closes her eyes as her chorus fills in vocally behind her, and some in the audience who know the song softly sing the words in encouragement. She recalls her place in the music, finds her voice, and they finish the song to a standing ovation. The audience cheers her and this small intrepid group for moving through feelings of fear and shame while standing tall, not allowing their fear to silence them. There are moist eyes and smiles everywhere I look. This particular choral musicking practice offers participants a chance to hold and be held in their identities in some powerfully healing ways. Theoretically, such identity practices could happen at any choral event, but in all of the many events I've participated in over the years, only in this movement have I experienced such unmitigated support. Something about this particular form of musicking serves important purposes for LGBTIQ people. So you hear in that, the beginnings of my talking about a framework that I use, that I found very, very useful for understanding the work we do, and that is that of holding and letting go identities as a moral practice. Also, the idea of counter-storying as necessary to social justice work. These, by the way, are frameworks that several people developed, but the holding and letting go, Hilda Lindemann, an ethicist, came up with. And so I want to explain a little bit about that. Our identities are basically a conglomeration of personal and cultural stories that enable or disable our abilities to our full being in the world. And that's that concept. That concept will be one that I keep pushing, because I think one of the core things that GALA choruses is about, and any social justice movement is about, is people being able to express their full being in the world and have that honored and respected. So we can hold or let go of identities well or badly. And I just want to give you a little bit of an example. So for most interactions, they're simple and they're based more or less on standard scripts like a play. For example, I open the door into a store and acknowledge the person walking out by holding the door for him. He might say thanks. Or he might grab the door over my head and insist that I go through first, denying me the opportunity to hold the door for him. In the process, everything from the ease or tension of our bodies to our facial expressions are saying things about how and in what identity we hold each other. Some men are clearly uncomfortable when I hold the door for them, because I am not playing by a gendered script that maintains their sense of who they are and who they think I should be in the world. But who they think I should be in the world is not who I am, nor is it who I'm willing to be. Within a split second in such an encounter, I'm left to decide whether and how to effectively reframe who and how both of us can be with each other in a manner that ideally denigrates neither of us. If I let it be and tacitly enact the identity of the little woman that his actions suggest, while internally holding myself as fully empowered and human, then I internally refuse the narrative, but have left him upholding and reinforcing the dominating gender story. As such, I have arguably acted unethically towards myself and him, allowing my own identity to be dissed while dismissing him as unimportant to my life. That said, sometimes that's the best we can do. It's also a first step in that internal refusal. Or I can resist the diminution of my identity by countering his action in some manner that might be verbal, physical, or both, in tones ranging from anger to warmth to good humor. We can perform these practices well or badly, but challenging and changing such entrenched narratives that deny us our full personhood is obviously work. The social practice of holding people in or letting go their identities well or badly happens at every level. So there are just layers of these stories and how they operate for us. The truth is, most of us don't want that much struggle in our lives, but the stepping back and going, we don't have to do it, is a point of privilege. One of the biggest challenges of long-term social change is that people's appetite for continuing the work waxes based on very recent incidents that incite action and then rather quickly wanes. I mean, we're going to see how the current waxing of action plays out. But my experience is that it's rather stunning how quickly it can die down. Those dedicated to working for social change need to deal with the present situation as well as think creatively long-term across generations. For a movement that has only recently been openly engaged in reproduction in the traditional sense, and whose community members come from diverse groups who historically have little in common, except shared forms of gender oppression, finding ways to effectively organize in the present, much less think in the long term, is challenging. And a big piece of this work is coming up with counter stories. And I want to say this is where the choruses play a really potentially, I think often powerful role, and one that I think we could do more intentionally and more powerfully if we understand these mechanisms well. Successful counter stories develop out of groups of people coming together in safe spaces to rethink, reframe, and re-story themselves as valued, moral humans in ways that free up their ability to act in the world and that can be mobilized for change in the larger culture. And, you know, when I was listening to people's stories, I heard over and over again about people who came to the chorus and were, you know, shy or, you know, not very active in the world at all. And singing with the chorus, people watched them blossom and they became leaders and took on things that they never would have taken on before. That story repeated itself many times. It's key to understand that counter stories have to always be part of what we call the master narratives, the hegemonic stories out there, because otherwise they wouldn't be comprehensible to people. So you have to build out of what's there. But a counter story is good enough in Lindemann's understanding if it manages to, quote, dilute the poison and so free the group members' moral agency, thereby increasing their ability to act freely in the world without denying the moral agency of others. And herein lies the rub, because it's very easy to build ourselves up at the expense of others and not be so cognizant of the ways in which we're doing that. And I think right now more than ever, we're really being called to think about how that's happening, especially around race. As queers, our ability to act freely in the world remains partial and more tenuous than we might like to admit. The freedoms we are able to exercise have come into being through centuries of work. And these freedoms can all too easily be erased. So I want to sort of, for comparison's sake, sort of offer a different context in which our choruses sing. And that is from one of the earliest versions of this, and that's the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus first performance after only 4 weeks of being together, following the murder of Harvey Milk and Mayor George Moscone. And this is from their history, this little line. They sang a hymn by Mendelssohn on the steps of City Hall, following the spontaneous candlelight procession of thousands of mourners who gathered there. And I argue that in doing so, the singers refuted the message that the double murder, both materially and symbolically, attempted to pose on all of them, that as gay men, they did not deserve to live. The singers actively claimed their right and the rights of all those protesting the murders with them, not only to life, but to beauty, grief, and joy. As the first chorus of the movement to include gay in their name, they honored Milk's memory by being out. In responding to violent acts and denial of human rights such as this one, queer choruses have often engaged in singing together as a form of protest. But what's interesting is the preponderance of choral musicking that occurs in formal settings. So while there's an element of protest in queering the formal space of choral musicking, staking a claim to the value that the formality of the space and the choral art form itself confers, queer choral musicking is more than protest. For LGBTIQ peoples, just the fact of finding and developing communities in itself is a challenge to this form of oppression. But to do so in highly cultured form that makes one's fuller being known and more knowable to larger communities changes who we get to be in the world. So that full expression of our humanity in contexts where, you know, when people get on a stage in a formal setting, like some great hall or a church, the setting itself confers authority of a sort. We have this whole social form that is about, you know, people listening and respecting who's on the stage. And in taking up that space as whomever, trans choruses, queer choruses, mixed men's, whatever, instantiates in its creation of community a counter story just right there. And then there's the music we sing. I want to think for a moment too about what deep change requires, because backlash comes, and backlash is always a sign that you've been successful, but it's usually far more stunning than we expect, and certainly has been. Backlash can all but sweep away or substantially undermine what seemed like solid social change. Legal judgments and legislation supporting affirmative action and reproductive rights, for example, have been substantially rolled back due to very effective backlash. When enough people are uneasy with or ambivalent about such changes, the political tides can shift to undermine any legal protections, even Supreme Court decisions. We need to work for change that holds up against pressure from those who disagree. Doing so requires that the majority of people feel comfortable enough with the changes, feel them to be morally right, such that arguments against them hold little sway. These new values must be integrated into the prevailing cultural narratives. The new stories of who and how people can be in the world must take the fabric of the old stories and weave in new elements such that the changes become the new common sense, so that to question them seems crazy to a large majority of people. Such changes to what counts for common sense requires much more than a 51% vote or a Supreme Court decision. Deep and abiding change does not come quickly or easily. It requires multi-level ongoing work to keep the value of such changes to the larger culture in the public conversation until those values become the norm to which all identities hew. Such change requires multi-generational effort. So I want to think for a moment about the stories of different identity groups, the pernicious ones, the ones that denigrate and erase or excuse brutalities and murder. And I'm sure many of you who've been with the choral movement or movement at all for any period of time have seen the work of challenging those stories and how just downright tedious it can become. Certainly in light of Black Lives Matter, you know, we have a whole history of people of African descent fighting these stories. The anti-slavery work is fighting the story that they're property. We are not property. So through the blossoming of the Harlem Renaissance, we are fully intellectual and artistic beings who can nurture our own culture even though it's been stolen from us. to the battles against lynching. We have a right to due process. To the actions of the 50s and 60s, we will not be segregated. To present day work to end racial profiling and police brutality in the school to prison pipeline, we deserve the right to be valued as full human beings in every aspect of our lives. The work continues. It's not something that stops. But the work continues today because for too many white people, the value of our own identities, consciously or not, depends on not being Black or brown. Men who are careful to distinguish themselves from women, straight or cisgendered people who are nervous about being perceived as queer in any way, and people with money who believe themselves to be better than those with less, all have identities built on othering. Such identities are structured on the story, I am not that. Sadly, those who are othered in various identities in manners subtle and not inevitably internalize these messages in ways that can be debilitating, damaging identities for which counter stories offer potential repair for the self and for the society. Lindemann explains counter stories redefine a past that has been up till now characterized incorrectly. They take the story that has, for the moment at least, been determined, undo it, and reconfigure it with new significance. Effective counter stories revise our mutual storing practices to be both more accurate and more inclusive. They not only challenge the underlying assumptions of the oppressive stories, but reframe them in ways that allow openings for new ways of being. So these stories must become our new common sense. And as we've been counter-storying, one of the interesting things that came up a lot in the interviews was how many people would, in trying to describe what role the choruses played in their lives, would revert to memories of sort of the communal aspects of their church experience as children. You know, many of us have moved away from churches because that wasn't the friendliest place to be. But what was very interesting is that in a video that the GMCLA put out about their Latin American tour, there was one young man who spoke about being seated next to a Mormon who was on his mission on one of their buses, and how they talked and how he felt like he was evangelizing. And I really appreciated him just coming forward with that, because I have no doubt that some members of his own chorus might cringe at such a religious parallel in a way that many progressive activists might, but in my own struggle to find words to describe the sorts of emotional commitments that continue to sustain this movement, I find his explicit parallel useful. Queer choral musicking has a purposefulness that makes it strangely more like having religion than the average non-religious based community chorus. But this religion is about neither God nor politics. Many members would leave if that were the case. Instead, it is a sort of justice seeking through shared pleasure evangelism. Queer choral musicking generally resists any overt connection to either religion or politics, but reaches out to people with the earnestness of both through the creation of beauty in a form that instantiates community through musicking. And so this evangelism has taken place in many places. I remember Jane Ramsire Miller speaking at the 2012 GALA Festival, challenging other courses to get out and get into the schools. And that was kind of a really important one. And many courses have since then. The It Gets Better campaign certainly had a play in that. But by combining an opportunity for schools to offer extracurricular musical education, which has been so defunded, along with the direct experience of singing with a group that identifies as LGBTIQA, many choruses are able to break into one of the most dangerous places for queer kids, schools, even as they functionally challenge one of the more hateful and inaccurate of the standard stereotypes, queers as pedophiles. Queer choral musicking at its best effectively celebrates all the voices in the house. By making use of the formality of choral musicking with its residue of the sacred in Western traditions, queer choruses create strategic spaces for healing the damage done by oppressive master narratives. Queer choruses embody in their practice a compelling counter story, one that challenges some of the most damaging stories used to oppress, that you are alone, that you have no right to commune with others, that all you think about is sex, and that the sex is not, and that sex in general is not a social good, especially not yours, and that you have no right to life or joy. The practice of actively, publicly, and joyfully offering creative counter-storying that provides mutual pleasuring through sonic beauty is appropriate to the task because its very form creates that which the master narratives work to deny. So this celebratory mutual sonic pleasuring just calls for the uses of the erotic by Audre Lorde to better illuminate its power. Briefly, for those of you who may not know Audre Lorde's uses of the erotic is power, she writes, "The erotic is a measure between our sense of self and the chaos of our strongest feelings. It is an internal sense of satisfaction to which once we have experienced it, we know we can aspire. For having experienced the fullness of this depth of feeling and recognizing its power, in honor and self-respect, we can require no less of ourselves." And it's this expansion of our capacity for joy that the choruses make possible in very particular ways that can be shared. And the sharing of it, she argues, is also very important because, well, first off, our erotic knowledge empowers us. It becomes a lens through which we scrutinize all aspects of our existence, forcing us to evaluate those aspects honestly in terms of their relative meaning within our lives. And that's a grave responsibility projected from within us, not to settle for the convenient, the shoddy, the conventionally expected, nor the merely safe. So this calling to our best selves in a world that would denigrate everything we are is an opening to joy. And in doing so is a refusal of the stories that would damage us and others. She argues the sharing of joy, whether physical, emotional, psychic, or intellectual, forms a bridge between the sharers, which can be the basis for understanding much of what is not shared between them and lessens the threat of their difference. Given the disparate pieces of identity that often problematically huddle together in queer community, LGBTIQ peoples, and the alphabet soup is an example of that, need all the bridges we can build among ourselves as well as beyond. Queer choral musicking creates opportunities for just such a sharing of joy, and it does so in a form that encourages respect for every voice. The fact that we come together to create this across all of our differences, those who have been in the movement for a very long time know that there have been places where that didn't match up so well, and people tussled with each other and had to come to terms with who they were in relationship to each other. And that's a constant process. And I think it's a beautiful process of this movement that by having this goal of mutual sonic pleasuring, we are willing to push ourselves to be our best selves, even when there's times when, and I offer examples in the book of the ways we go, Arr! So, but we need to both better understand and honor our best practices. Choral musicking itself, I think, offers us some models for that. If we were more intentional, we could make use of. So I want to argue that we err when we try to simply be inclusive, especially in cultural forms like choral musicking. Rather, we need to be more conscious on every level about the ways in which each of us is both oppressed and privileged. We do best to both respect our own and others' needs for relatively safe spaces to explore and express our identities with others, while also remaining aware that the ways in which we do so might be at the expense of others. If we hope to live up to the inclusivity we espouse, of holding ourselves and others in our identities in healthy and supportive ways, then we will look for ways to change our own practices for greater social justice. It is an inevitably imperfect process, but choral musicking offers practices for considering how to better embrace differences, acknowledging that there are many different voices in the room and making creative best use of each of those voices for greater shared purposes. So for example, a primarily white gay men's chorus looking to create greater social justice might best regularly assess how well they balance the healing identity practices of their musicers, singers, artistic staff, audience members, with using their privilege to more effectively address the social inequities of race and gender, among others. In what ways does the practice of holding themselves in their identities well effectively denigrate others? Do they hold themselves and others in a form of masculinity that is based on heterosexist values that not only denigrate women, but also denigrates themselves? The Portland Gay Men's Chorus stepped up to this task in a very interesting way in Festival 2016 by singing I Am Woman. That, by the way, could have been done very badly. But in the context of social media's hashtag, I am, fill in the name of the last victim of violence, to show support, their performance made an important statement and one that I appreciated. These issues might be addressed on many levels, from the choice of music to the performance venues to the kinds of community outreach. By allying with groups working on a range of social justice issues, not only do choruses expand their reach, but they more deeply serve their own social justice missions. Given the overall whiteness and relative class privilege of queer choral musicers, working with the homeless, those in prison, or local communities of color, for example, seems important, to say the least. As Lindemann makes clear, there is no perfect way to create effective counter-narratives because they are inevitably, to some degree, tethered to current norms. Otherwise, no one would comprehend them. And creative social practices such as choral musicking are always creating narratives, counter and master, in both form and content. This places a moral responsibility on all of us to challenge ourselves to create increasingly equitable counter-storying practices, ones that make space for respecting all identities. So I want to end with a small reading about this sonic pleasuring and the nature of that. And then I very much look forward to your questions and comments. The communing possible through choral singing is powerful. It begins with literal inspiration to take in breath, the first requirement to singing. Doing this well as a group in time together is a challenge, at first clumsily attempted. Slowly, through practice, it becomes a pleasurable rhythm, each body in tune with each other's breath. Not only does group song making require regular practice to make it beautiful, but it requires an intimate attention to each other simultaneously as individuals and as a group. At best, singers listen to both themselves and each other's every breath, tone, and silence for cues with an attentiveness that few of us ever receive outside of the most intimate of relationships. Choral singing requires the ability to hold one's own while constantly listening and tuning with others. Together, singers are able to produce sound that no one singer alone is capable of producing, not only because we cannot sing two or more parts at once, or because numbers increase vocal power, but because even in unison, every voice is affected by the voices surrounding it, tempered in relationship to the voices next to it. When the vocal sound produced is perfectly formed, the resonance materially thrills the singers like a bell's clear ring through every cell of the body. It creates an experience of beauty and often deep emotion produced in relationship with bodies unmediated by instruments. It reaches us through language as those of us with hearing knew at first, as vocal tones, rhythm, and sound through oral connections. It can be a space of the erotic in Lord's sense because it is mutually pleasuring experience and expansion of our capacity for joy. It by no means is always this way. But the practice of choral musicking offers this potential for any group of singers. Along with Lord's more full-bodied sense of the erotic comes acknowledgement of our moments of ecstasy, the places where, in the context of choral musicking, the embodied communal sharing of such joy can lead to what one singer at a workshop referred to as the best group sex there is. This vein of expression runs throughout the interview, suggesting that the erotic element is even more important in specific ways for those of us whose identities are damaged in precisely the expression of our erotic sensibilities. Queer choral musicers express moments of sharing profound joy, moments of ecstasy with all the power usually associated with a religious experience, but without the religion. These are experiences that make our hearts skip a beat with a knowledge in ourselves that we are part of something much larger than we comprehend, whose beauty makes us hold our breath, for which the exhale is the embodied expression of joy. Such qualities keep singers and audience members returning to this place of what I believe is, at its best, sacredly erotic communing. If we understand the sacred as an experience of that which is greater than ourselves and are able to experience this not as an affirmation of some outside entity's power over us, as is the case in most religious contexts, but communally in resistance to anyone's power to oppress, including our own, then we lift the sacred out of the relatively closed realms of many current religious institutional practices to create more open, secular, and polyphonic social practice for holding identities that are not well held otherwise. For those who have largely been left at the margins of both family and community life, such communing is not just compelling, it is necessary to enacting counter stories that allow us to know ourselves and others differently. Thank you very much. Oh, the clips are still going. Should we leave them? Hang on, let me see Charlie. Where'd you go, Charlie? There you are. I can stop sharing the screen, I suppose.
And here I am.
There you are.
Jules, listen, thank you so much. That was amazing. It's one of the hardest things to do, to put into words something that is essentially impossible to put into words. And so the fact that you made such a masterful effort is incredible. I'll remember mutual sonic pleasuring for some considerable time. I think that's just a great phrase. We're going to take some questions, folks. If I look a little sweaty, it's because I'm in New York and it's really hot this evening. I think the excitement of Kamala Harris is also affecting me somewhat. And I'm not sure whether Jules told you the name of her book enough times. It's called A Queerly Joyful Noise, and you should get a copy. You really should, because it's amazing. And now, 20 minutes of questions. I'm going to start, Jules, with a question which is to your right. Everyone has been looking at this rose to your right for the last 40 minutes. Tell us about your rose.
Oh, you're so funny. It's a lesbian rose. My sweetheart picked that. My sweetheart picked that for me before this presentation. It's in the bush is in our front yard. It was produced. I don't know what terminology you use about creating rose types, but Mary Margaret McBride, a lesbian who was friends with Eleanor Roosevelt, was the one who came up with this. Yes, came up with this beautiful rose. So yes, and thank you, Heather.
My next question is really about your own personal relationship to singing, your own journey to where you got to now. Just tell us about what singing means to you, because everyone in the room, the virtual room, will have their own story and their own sense of what it means to them.
I've been thinking these questions, and there's so many answers to them. I have always sung, and it's, quite honestly, it was kind of a mixed thing for me because I'll just say that in my family of origin, singing was a way to calm the beast, if you will. And so it has that tension with it as well, but it was also really freeing. There's a freedom in allowing one's voice forward. I will, I'll tell you a funny story. When I was taking voice lessons many years back, I was in my vocal lesson with my coach, and we were talking about some opera thing, and I imitated an opera singer. And my vocal coach's eyes got wide. Corby Myrick is her name. And she looked at me and she says, "Where have you been hiding that voice?" Under rocks. But I said, but my answer to her was, "That's not me."
No, but that's the whole point. It really is. Get used to it.
Yes, yes.
Listen, someone on Facebook has just sent us another question. Sean Loring has sent us a question, which is interesting. Is there a particular song that resonates with you at the moment and captures the spirit of today? Which is a hard question because today is a very specific day.
Ay, 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 ay. This is the thing I'm worst at. I'm terrible at. Well,
maybe a favorite song.
Well, the one that's going to come up for me right now, because people's lives are at stake, is Singing for Our Lives. And right. I think, so many people in the movement told me stories of, literally will say over and over again, the chorus saved my life, the chorus saved my life, singing saved my life. And I think for many people, and not just in our movement, singing is a way to calm oneself in the face of fear. And it's really a powerful communing tool in so many ways. So I'm bad at that, Sean, I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
But that's the one that comes up for me right now.
That's absolutely fine. Loretta Haggard has a question, which is in all of our minds. And again, if you could just solve it for us in 5 seconds, that would be great, because it's only a small one. How can Gala choruses survive COVID? No. And she goes on, which keeps us physically distant and severely hampers our ability to achieve emotional connection through making music. I mean, maybe your own spin on that. What do you think is the main thing that Gala choruses can do for people at this time, and how can we hang on to that?
Well, one of the things is to remember and connect with all of the things that our choruses mean to us,
Right.
to keep those choruses, to understand that keeping the movement and keeping that there for ourselves means holding ourselves through this difficult time, and not letting go of our chorus, but maybe taking the time to even, I would argue, like, this is a time to dig in and think about who we are in this new world. This is why understanding the mechanics of why the choruses are so powerful, or what they do for us, what works and what doesn't so much, and why, helps us to think more clearly about, well, what would be good next steps? And every chorus has its own context and its own people and its own history. And so there's no one answer to that question. But I think it's a great time to dig in and ask who we are, especially given the uprisings we have around Black lives and honoring Black lives. I think we could ask ourselves, how might we do that better?
Yeah, and I think it's amazing the different ways that Gala choruses are finding to keep the sense of community going, keep the activism going, and keep, all of the things that we our ingenuity and our creativity is what's going to save us, I think. And
yes, and keep singing.
Well, and keep singing in whatever form you can, of course. Yes, absolutely. Listen, here's another one from Emily Steers. How do you go about discussing the idea of the secular church, this idea of sacred? She says, especially in a community so wounded by church. I think wounded by church is a really powerful place to start with that. But how do you conceive of the idea of a secular church?
Well, the idea of the sacred need not be about a god or a church or anything like that. We decide in many ways. I mean, these are all, so we're just all stories. I mean, homo neurons would be a better name for us. We really don't know anything. We make up stories about things. And in fact, if you study neuroscience, we're constantly making up stories. So we shouldn't really fully trust our brains to begin with. And yet, in order to function, we all have to believe that we know, and we really don't. So if you think of ourselves as, you know, these collections of stories, oh my God, I just lost my train of thought. Give me the piece of that question again.
It's about church and about being wounded by church.
Yes. So what is sacred is a story. But if we take the feeling, like if you study people talking about what is powerful about the sacred for them, if we talk about the human feeling of it, what it brings up, it's a moment of transcendence of the ego, in one way to put it, of understanding and really feeling ourselves to be part of something much larger than our little lives. Our suffering often happens really because we get stuck in our little lives and take it too seriously, quite honestly. This experience of being able to be part of this bigger thing of beauty, and one that one is making together, is I think a potential practice that we could, you know, really build on. It's polyphonic. If we understand that and really respect all the voices, yeah, I know sopranos are top, but yes, we have all those jokes precisely because we're all very human. But it's that, you know, it's like going for our better selves. What is our better selves? And our better selves are, you know, beyond that ego. It's that sharing moment, that's that sharing, in this case, of beauty moment, that's so profound.
I think we have time for one, possibly two, but at least one more. Stephen Judson has a question. Singing saved my life is his heading. Can you think of one person in particular whose life has been saved by singing that you'd like to share with everybody, just as a sense of what this movement can do?
There's so many that come to mind. And I wouldn't really be able to name somebody, but you know, one of the stories that got told to me was from a director who was talking about a conversation he'd had with a man in his chorus. And, you know, they were at a party afterwards or something, and they were bantering, and this guy said, no, you know, I really want you to know the chorus saved my life. And he says, oh yeah, you know, it saved everybody, it saved all of us. He says, no, I need you to know it saved my life. Wow. I was like that close to taking, he was that close to taking his own life. And it was his time in the chorus that made him change that view. And that was just one of many, many such powerful stories. And you know, it shakes you when you think that it was just a chorus practice that might have changed somebody's mind about taking their own life.
Yeah. Listen, I'm, you know, I know I can share from the two choruses that I've led those same experiences and those same stories about saving lives. And I think that's actually a great place to just draw this hour-long presentation to a close. So I just want to thank you, Jules, for all your amazing insights. And it's a huge amount of work in this book, I can see, and it's kind of a lifetime of thinking and singing and sonic pleasuring. I'm so grateful to you, and I'm sure all the people out there in the world would be applauding now. Of course, they can't, or we don't know, but
I'm imagining grand applause.
Imagine grand applause. Thank you on behalf of GALA Choruses, on behalf of all the people who are listening, for sharing your thoughts with us this evening. I have one more comment on the chat to share with you from someone called Reiko Dig. I don't know if you know who this person is. And the comment is this: my mother is raving about your voice right now, and you aren't even singing. Hilarious emoji.
Love you, Reiko. Love you, Keiko.
So the final thing I need to ask you to do, thank you so much for listening in on Facebook if you're joining us. Jules, I need you to give control of the
Of the
session
screen
back to
back
Paul.
to,
Otherwise, we're
oh,
going to
wait a
go on
minute.
forever, it seems.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so hang on.
For everybody else, thank you so much for coming and joining us. I'm sure there'll be more of these great presentations. Part of Gala Chorus's commitment to all of our members in these difficult times. Good luck, stay safe, and keep singing. Good night.
And stay connected. Thank you.